Beneath the sacred halls of the Vatican lies a secret crypt, a labyrinth of ancient tomes, sealed records, and forbidden truths. When Father Matteo, an exorcist archivist, is ordered to digitize the church's possession logs, he discovers the unholy remnants of centuries-old spiritual warfare. But one file refuses to stay silent, a case still alive, updating itself in real time. As shadows stir and prayers twist into whispers, Matteo realizes he's not preserving history, he's awakening it. And some evils, once unsealed, refuse to be contained, not by faith, not by walls, and not by God himself. The heavy iron door groaned in protest as I pushed it open, the sound echoing through the cold stone corridors beneath the Vatican archives. I paused, the chill that seeped from the crypt beneath brushing against my skin like a whispered warning. This was no ordinary archive. This was a sanctum of silence, where the church had locked away its darkest battles, the spiritual wars fought in shadows, far from the public eye. I adjusted the strap of my bag, the weight of the equipment within a tangible reminder of my task. To digitize the sealed possession logs, the records of possessions and exorcisms conducted over centuries. These were not mere documents. They were battlegrounds etched in ink and parchment, chronicles of divine horror and human frailty. The air inside was thick with the scent of aged parchment and a faint acrid aroma that unsettled me. A hint of sulfur mingled with the mustiness of neglect. Candlelight flickered weakly from sconces along the walls, their flames struggling against the darkness that seemed to pulse like a living entity. Shadows danced and recoiled, as if aware of my intrusion. Sister Beatrice was already there, her serene presence a stark contrast to the oppressive atmosphere. She offered a gentle nod, her eyes reflecting a quiet resignation. Cardinal Vesevi's instructions were clear. The contents of this crypt were to remain strictly confidential. I was to work swiftly, meticulously, but with utmost discretion. I approached the first row of shelves, my fingers tracing the spines of leather-bound tomes thick with dust. Each book was a silent sentinel, guarding stories of souls touched by darkness. The possession logs were sealed with ancient symbols and wax stamps, barriers not just physical, but spiritual. I hesitated before the first volume, feeling a faint vibration beneath the leather cover, as if the book itself breathed with a life of its own. Setting up the digitization equipment was a task that demanded precision. The scanner's mechanical hum was a fragile thread against the crypt's suffocating silence. As I worked, a creeping sensation settled over me, a subtle pressure at the base of my skull, as if unseen eyes were watching, waiting. The first scans revealed faded handwriting and cryptic notations, accounts of exorcisms where faith had clashed with malevolent forces. The language was dense, laced with prayers and invocations, interspersed with desperate pleas. I could almost hear the whispered prayers and curses that had been etched into these pages, remnants of spiritual warfare. Time blurred as I moved from one log to another, the weight of history pressing down. The crypt seemed to breathe around me, a living tomb where decay was not just physical but spiritual. The deeper I ventured, the more palpable the unease grew. Was it the residue of countless battles lost and won, or something else, something ancient and restless? As night deepened above ground, the crypt's silence was broken by a faint sound, a whisper carried on the stale air. I froze, straining to listen. It was unintelligible, yet unmistakably present. I shook my head, telling myself it was fatigue, the mind's trick in a place so steeped in darkness. But as I continued, the feeling did not fade. Instead, it thickened, wrapping around me like a shroud. The forbidden texts seemed to pulse with a dark energy, a spiritual decay that gnawed at the edges of my faith and reason. I closed the volume I had been scanning and looked around the crypt, the flickering candlelight casting long shadows. This was no ordinary archive. This was a tomb of secrets, a cage for horrors best left untouched. Yet here I was, the Church's chosen archivist, tasked with unraveling the past that still whispered in the dark. A cold shiver traced my spine. I was about to learn that some doors, once opened, refused to be closed again. The days that followed were a blur of silence and shadows. Each log I digitized seemed to deepen the crypt's hold on me. The sense of spiritual decay seeping through the pages and into the air around me. I found myself speaking prayers under my breath, clinging to the rituals that had grounded me for years as an exorcist. Sister Beatrice proved invaluable, her calm presence a balm in the oppressive gloom. Together, we catalogued the logs, marking each digitized entry with meticulous care. Yet even she could not hide the unease that flickered behind her eyes whenever the topic of the possession logs arose. Cardinal Vescovi visited once, his gaze sharp as he reminded me of the importance of discretion. "These records," he said gravely, "are not just history, they are warnings. The darkness we combat is eternal, and the Church's duty is to contain it, lest it spread beyond these walls." His words settled heavily on my soul. I had known the battles of possession firsthand, but to confront their legacy in this crypt was another matter entirely. The logs were more than documentation. They were living testaments to divine horror, spiritual decay captured in ink and shadow. One evening, as the last candle guttered and died, I lingered before a particularly ancient tome. Its leather was cracked and worn, the seal faintly illuminated by the dying light. I reached out, hesitating for a moment before breaking the wax seal, a gesture forbidden by all protocol. The moment the seal broke, a chill swept through the crypt, and I heard it clearly this time. A whisper, not from any human voice, but something darker, something ancient. It spoke of pain and fury, of chains and freedom. My heart thundered in my chest. The crypt around me seemed to lean in, the shadows thickening, the air growing heavier. The sealed logs were not mere records. They were prisons, and I had just opened the door. I swallowed hard, knowing that this first step into the forbidden was only the beginning of a journey that would test the boundaries of faith, reason, and the very nature of human courage. I had descended beneath the sacred halls, but now I faced the darkness that lurked beneath the sacred itself. The crypt was silent save for the soft scraping of Luca's fingers against brittle parchment and the faint hum of the digital interface perched atop the ancient oak desk. Layers of dust clung to the corners of the crypt's vaulted ceiling, and the air was thick with the scent of aged leather and candle wax. Luca Moretti had been assigned to this deep recess beneath the Vatican archives to digitize the Church's most guarded secrets, the possession logs, files sealed tight for centuries, chronicling the darkest battles between man, demon, and divine will. Tonight, as the candlelight flickered uncertainly, Luca's eyes were drawn to a file that should have been sealed and barred from his view. The digital screen before him displayed a list of cases, each marked with red seals, except one. This file, ominously titled Case 47, the unnamed, bore no seal. What was stranger still was a time stamp blinking softly, updating second by second. Curiosity wrestled with caution as Luca hesitated, his finger hovering above the mouse. The air seemed to thicken, pressing in on him with unseen weight. Yet, the archivist's scholarly mind overrode his unease. He double-clicked the file. The screen filled with text, a detailed account of a possession unlike any he had encountered in his previous studies. The entries described a man whose soul was gradually consumed by an entity not merely demonic but something far older, more divine in its horror. The words twisted and writhed on the page, describing spiritual decay as if it were a living plague, not just metaphor. As Luca scrolled, the text updated before his very eyes. New lines appeared, chronicling events that could not have been recorded by human hands. The victim's symptoms worsened. Voices spoke in tongues, shadows flickered at the edge of vision, and the man's prayers turned to blasphemies. The horror was conveyed not only in words, but in the way the text itself seemed to pulse with a malevolent life. A sudden chill swept the crypt, snuffing the candle's flame momentarily. Luca's breath hitched as a whisper brushed past his ear, unintelligible, yet laden with ancient menace. Shaking, he looked around the room, but the crypt remained empty save for the rows of forbidden texts. He forced himself back to the screen. Another entry had appeared. The seal weakens. The entity stirs beyond containment. Luca's heart pounded. This was no ordinary case file. It was alive, or worse, possessed by the very force it sought to document. He tried to close it, but the file resisted, the interface freezing and flashing cryptic symbols in Latin and an indecipherable script. A bead of sweat traced down Luca's temple as he realized the implications. If this file was updating in real time, was the entity still active? Was it reaching beyond the crypt's confines through these digital pages? He reached for the radio transmitter clipped to his carsack, fingers trembling. "Control, this is Moretti. I've found an unsealed case file." That static cut him off. The crypt's ancient walls seemed to pulse with an unseen energy, the shadows deepening and stretching toward him. The line went dead. Luca's scholarly detachment shattered, replaced by a raw, primal fear. He was no longer merely an archivist. He was a sentinel standing at the threshold of an unfolding nightmare. He steadied his breath and whispered a prayer, the words feeling fragile against the oppressive darkness. Then, with reluctant resolve, he began to read anew, determined to uncover the truth within the unsealed case, even as the crypt itself seemed to watch and wait. The digital text continued to shift, revealing horrors unspoken, divine terrors that strained the limits of human comprehension. Luca knew one thing with chilling certainty. This was no longer just history, it was a present threat, and the battle for souls was far from over. As the first light of dawn threatened the horizon, Luca sat alone beneath the sacred halls, surrounded by echoes of spiritual decay and the whispering promise of divine horror. And somewhere, deep within the crypt, the unsealed case file waited, alive and hungry. The crypt was colder than usual tonight, or perhaps it was simply the weight of what I was about to uncover that seeped deep into my bones. The candlelight sputtered as a faint draft whispered through the ancient stone corridors beneath the Vatican archives, carrying with it the stale scent of dust and something far more unsettling: rot, spiritual decay, a corruption not of this world. I settled at the worn wooden desk, the case file open before me. Unlike the others, this one pulsed with a strange life, its pages seeming to shift imperceptibly under my gaze. I could feel it like a low hum vibrating through the air, a vibration that resonated within my chest and whispered directly into my mind. The first time I heard it, I thought it was my imagination, a faint murmur, barely audible, curling round my ears like a serpent's hiss. But the sound grew clearer with each passing moment: whispers, half-formed words, a voice that was not my own. I blinked hard, trying to dispel the sensation, but the voices remained, threading through the silence of the crypt like tendrils of smoke. I tried to focus on the text. The possession logs were meticulous records, each entry a testament to the Church's unyielding battle against darkness. But this one was different. Entries appeared to write themselves, the ink seeming to flow like blood from an unseen hand. The dates and times updated in real time. It was as if the log was alive, documenting an ongoing torment. A sudden chill swept across the room. The shadows cast by the candle flickered, stretching unnaturally along the stone walls. I felt a presence, unseen but oppressive, pressing against my consciousness. My skin crawled as a cold breath brushed the back of my neck, and for a moment I was sure I was not alone. Then came the vision, shattering rupture in the veil of my reality. The crypt dissolved into a kaleidoscope of grotesque images, faces twisted in silent agony, eyes hollow and accusing, hands clawing at invisible barriers, desperate to escape, and a darkness so absolute it swallowed all light, all hope. I gasped and blinked, the candle sputtering back to steady flame as the vision faded. My heart pounded against my ribs like a frantic drum. Was this a warning, a glimpse into the suffering endured by the possessed, or worse, an invitation to join them in their torment? Desperate for answers, I scoured the margins of the log, discovering cryptic notes penned in a hurried, almost frantic script. Names and phrases leaped out at me. Malthus, an ancient demon known from apocryphal texts. Veil of the Abyss, a term hinting at a cosmic boundary. The Bound One, a title that suggested imprisonment but also immense power. Each word was a shard of a terrible puzzle, a darkness lurking just beneath the surface of our sacred history. The air thickened again, heavier now, as if the crypt itself was inhaling, watching. The faint scent of sulfur burned at my nostrils, and the whispers turned from murmurs to urgent pleas. Or was it threats? I could no longer tell. I gripped the edges of the table, fighting to anchor myself in the tangible world. The walls seemed to breathe, undulating subtly, shadows pooling and stretching like living things. My mind teetered on the edge of sanity, the boundary between nightmare and waking slipping away. In that dark crucible, I understood the terrible truth. The entity trapped within this case file was not merely a remnant of past possession, but a living, evolving force, one that could breach the veil between worlds and corrupt the very fabric of reality. And now it was reaching for me. The candle flickered once more before steadying, casting its trembling light over the ancient text. I took a deep breath, steadying my trembling hands. The battle was no longer confined to the pages. It had begun within me. I whispered a prayer, though the words felt fragile and hollow in the suffocating dark. With trembling resolve, I prepared to delve deeper, knowing that every answer uncovered would only draw me further into the shadowed heart of the divine horror. The crypt held its breath, so did I. Outside, the distant toll of a bell echoed through the vastness of the Vatican, marking the passing of time and the coming of a night that would change everything. And somewhere, beyond the veil, the entity stirred once more. The dim light of the oil lamp flickered against the cracked stone walls as I carefully pulled another volume from the shelf, its leather cover brittle and worn from centuries of neglect. The scent of aged parchment and mold filled the air, mingling with the faint but unmistakable scent of incense long burned out. This was no ordinary book, it was one of the forbidden texts, bound in secrecy and shadow, whispered about in hushed tones among the Vatican's inner sanctum. Father Luca had warned me to tread carefully, but my curiosity, now a gnawing obsession, pushed me onward. Opening the volume, my eyes adjusted to the dense Latin script, the ink faded but still legible. Margin notes, penned in an ancient hand, traced desperate attempts to understand and restrain the entity whose containment had faltered. Each line revealed a fragment of a story so chilling that my skin prickled beneath my cassock. These were not mere accounts of possession. They spoke of a cosmic horror, an abomination not meant to cross the boundaries of our mortal realm. "Look here," Father Luca whispered, stepping closer. His voice was low, reverent, yet laced with fear. These annotations were made by the original exorcists assigned to this case. They believed they could bind the entity with ritual and prayer, but it was not so simple. I traced a faded symbol etched repeatedly throughout the pages, and intricate pattern that seemed almost alive, writhing beneath my gaze. The text referenced a summoning, a breach in the veil between the sacred and the profane. The original ritual, intended to seal the entity, had instead torn the fabric of spiritual containment, allowing a fragment of the horror to persist, feeding and growing in the crypt shadows. We moved deeper into the alcove, where the flicker of candlelight revealed faded frescoes on the walls. They depicted scenes of celestial battles, angels locked in eternal struggle against writhing, grotesque figures. The artistry was hauntingly beautiful, yet steeped in torment. Faces frozen in agony and triumph alike told a story of divine warfare, a war that had evidently not been won. These images, Father Lucas said, are the Church's silent testimony. They speak of the spiritual decay that has spread unnoticed, eating away at the sanctity of these halls. I felt the weight of his words as a chill crept up my spine. Returning to the manuscripts, I read aloud a passage describing a failed exorcism that culminated in a violent rupture, spiritual energies clashing and tearing through the very fabric of the crypt. The air grew colder, almost electric, as if the words themselves summoned the echoes of that ancient battle. "The entity is not dormant," I murmured, voice barely steady. "It is stirring." Father Luca nodded grimly. "And with every page you uncover, it becomes more aware of your presence." Suddenly, the candlelight flickered wildly, casting monstrous shadows that danced grotesquely across the stone walls. My breath caught as I realized the crypt was responding, the spiritual decay manifesting with renewed vigor. The symbol I had seen earlier was not just a mark of containment, but a seal one that was fraying. My hands trembled as I closed the book. The knowledge I had gained was a double-edged sword. It illuminated the path forward, but also revealed the precariousness of our situation. The entity's origin was entwined with a failed containment, a failure that now threatened to unravel all that the Church had fought to protect. "We must proceed cautiously," Father Luca warned. "The forbidden texts speak not only of past failures, but of the price yet to be paid." As I left the alcove, the shadows seemed to follow, whispering secrets that chilled me to my core. The battle between sacred and profane was far from over, and I was now an unwilling participant in a war that stretched beyond time itself. I resolved to delve deeper, to uncover every secret these forbidden texts held. For the sake of my soul and the sanctity of the Vatican, I had no choice but to face the darkness head-on. The crypt beneath the sacred halls was no longer just a repository of history, was a battleground, and the entity was awakening.